The old-fashioned spilled across the marble table when Eliza stumbled while serving guests, and for a terrible instant, silence engulfed the golden hall. Crystal glasses clinked against the polished floor as the amber liquid drew capricious patterns on the white tablecloth, like a portent of what was to come. It was precisely in this moment of pure vulnerability that her eyes met Griffin's for the first time, and something impossible to explain happened, as if the entire universe had paused to witness the birth of a story no one would ever forget. Sometimes, the most embarrassing accidents lead us to the most beautiful destinations, she would reflect later. Eliza Harlow was just a 22-year-old woman, recently arrived from the valleys of Napa, to work as a waitress at one of the most luxurious hotels in Newport, Rhode Island. The Seacliff Hotel stood majestically on a cliff, its centuries-old stone walls bathed in Atlantic sunshine and its large windows reflecting the infinite blue of the ocean. For someone raised among vineyards and the smell of moist earth, that palace of glass and marble was as intimidating as it was fascinating. Her natural kindness radiated through her simple gestures, always taking care to add an extra flower to the vase on the tables of the loneliest guests, or remembering the preferred tea of the Boston lady who had been visiting the hotel for 3 decades. Behind her silent determination, working double shifts to support her ailing grandmother in her small hometown, hid a keen intuition that made her perceive the unspoken needs of those around her. "1,000 apologies, sir," she murmured with burning cheeks, as she tried to contain the disaster with the napkin she carried in her apron. Griffin Blackwood, at 45, had built a financial empire that spanned 3 continents, but carried a profound emptiness that not even all the zeros in his bank account could fill. His primary motivation had become a desperate search for authenticity, in a world where every smile directed at him cost money, and every word was calculated to extract favors. "Don't worry," he replied with a voice that, unexpectedly for both of them, lacked the imperious tone to which he was accustomed. "Accidents happen." The restaurant manager rushed over, dissolving into apologies and shooting withering glances at Eliza. The hotel's prestige was at stake, and this man was no ordinary client, although Eliza didn't know that yet. "Mr. Blackwood, this is unforgivable. I assure you we will take immediate measures." But Griffin raised a hand, interrupting her with an elegant gesture that revealed years of undisputed authority. "It was an insignificant accident," he said, and for an instant, as he observed Eliza's amber eyes, something stirred inside him, as if a forgotten memory were trying to emerge to the surface. "In fact, I'd like her to continue serving me." The sun was beginning to sink on the horizon, tinting the dining room with copper tones that danced across the faces of the diners. Outside, waves crashed against the rocks in an ancestral rhythm, oblivious to the small drama unfolding inside. Neither of them could have imagined then that this simple meeting would change the course of their lives forever. The next morning dawned clear, with that intense blue that only the Atlantic coast can offer. Eliza had slept little, tormented by the embarrassment of the incident and the fear of losing her job. She prepared herself with special care, gathering her dark chestnut hair in a perfect bun and applying just a touch of color to her lips, something unusual for her. The hotel restaurant gleamed under the morning light that filtered through the large windows. The first guests were beginning to arrive for breakfast, and she moved between the tables with the natural grace that characterized her when she saw him. Griffin Blackwood occupied a table by the window, his gaze lost in the blue horizon and an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Arming herself with courage, Eliza approached his table. "Good morning, sir. May I offer you anything else?" she asked, trying to make her voice sound professional. Griffin looked up and for a second seemed surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see her again. "Good morning," he replied, and the hint of a smile softened his angular features. "A cappuccino, please. The first one has gone cold." As Eliza walked away toward the counter, she could feel his gaze following her. What she couldn't see was the internal struggle developing within that man, the silent debate between the distrust forged over years and a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time. When she returned with the coffee, she served it carefully. The foam formed small hearts that she didn't even realize she was creating. "Thank you," he said, and their fingers brushed briefly as she passed him the cup. "Eliza, right? I read it on your name tag." "Yes, sir," she replied, surprised by the fact that he had noticed this detail. "A lyrical name," he commented with an almost imperceptible smile. "You know, yesterday I couldn't properly thank you for your sincerity after the incident." Eliza blushed at the memory of how she had refused the generous tip he had tried to give her after the disaster with the old-fashioned. "It was nothing, Mr. Blackwood. As I told you, a job well done is its own reward." Griffin looked at her intently, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex enigma. "That's an uncommon philosophy these days," he said finally. "It reminds me of—" He stopped, as if he had been about to reveal something too personal. "In any case, I'm glad you're still here." A group of businessmen entered the restaurant, and Eliza had to excuse herself to attend to them. Throughout the morning, between the coming and going of trays and orders, their gazes crossed repeatedly, each one more charged with questions than the last. That night, in the small room she shared with another waitress in the staff area, Eliza called her grandmother as she did every day. The tired but affectionate voice of Granny Evelyn was her anchor, her reminder of why she worked so hard. "And how was your day, child?" asked the elderly woman after telling her about the small events in the town. Eliza hesitated for a moment. "It was different," she finally replied, not knowing why she didn't mention the incident or the strange man who had defended her. "Gran, do you think sometimes people can connect without apparent reason?" Granny Evelyn's soft laughter resonated through the phone. "Oh, my dear, what you call without apparent reason is precisely what some of us call destiny." Meanwhile, a few miles away, in the presidential suite of the hotel, Griffin remained awake, contemplating the lights of the fishing boats blinking on the horizon. For the first time in years, he wasn't reviewing financial reports before sleeping. Instead, he was recalling over and over the simple phrase that had left him completely disarmed. "A job well done is its own reward." That night, he couldn't sleep, tormented by an internal conflict between his profound fear of not being loved for who he really was versus his growing desire to find someone who could see beyond his fortune. What remains of a man when you take away everything he has accumulated? He wondered as dawn began to tinge the horizon pink. During the following week, a silent routine was established. Each morning at precisely 7:30, Griffin occupied the same table by the window, and each morning Eliza served him his cappuccino with the same meticulous attention. What began as brief exchanges about the weather gradually evolved into longer conversations, taking advantage of the quiet moments in the restaurant. "Where are you from exactly?" he asked one day, as the aroma of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee floated between them like a tangible presence. "A small town near St. Helena in Napa Valley," she replied, instinctively adjusting the perfectly aligned cutlery. "It's called Oakville. You've probably never heard of it." An enigmatic smile crossed Griffin's face. "I know the area well. The best wines in the world come from there." Eliza's eyes lit up with a special brightness. "My family had vineyards a long time ago," she commented, and a passing shadow crossed her face. "But that was before I was born." Griffin noticed the change in her voice but didn't press. Instead, he diverted the conversation to lighter topics, discovering with surprise that he simply enjoyed hearing her talk about the small things that shaped her day. For Eliza, those morning conversations became something precious. There was something in the genuine attention with which Griffin listened to her that made her feel valued, in a way she had never experienced before. On a rainy morning, as the sea furiously lashed against the cliffs, Griffin arrived at the restaurant drenched, his usual composure altered by the storm. Without thinking twice, Eliza brought him a clean towel along with his coffee. "Thank you," he said, surprised by the gesture. "It wasn't necessary." She shrugged with a smile. "It's what I would do for anyone who arrived like this." "Precisely," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "That's what disconcerts me about you, Eliza. You treat everyone equally, no matter who they are." The comment disconcerted her. "And how should it be, if not?" Griffin looked at her for a long time before answering. "In my world, people change their behavior according to the power or money they think you have. Authenticity is a scarce commodity." Something in his tone made Eliza look at him more carefully. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that contrasted with his image of a confident businessman. "Then it must be a very lonely world," she replied with simplicity. The impact of her words was visible on Griffin's face. as if she had touched an open wound with the gentleness of a caress. That day, for the first time, he remained in the restaurant longer than usual, watching her work, fascinated by the naturalness with which she moved among the clients, offering the same sincere smile to everyone, from the American millionaire in Suite 302 to the elderly couple sharing a modest breakfast. When he finally left, he left a small envelope on the table. Upon opening it, Eliza found a card with his name and a phone number, along with a handwritten note. "In case someday you want to show me your world, away from here." The card remained stored in the pocket of her uniform throughout the day, like a sweet secret that she occasionally touched to make sure it was real. The first significant obstacle appeared on a Friday afternoon, when Eliza was absent-mindedly leafing through a magazine forgotten by some guest in the staff lounge. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized a familiar face on the cover. Under the headline, "The East Coast Midas," Griffin Blackwood posed with a serious expression. Identified as one of the most influential businessmen in North America, the article detailed his empire: luxury hotels, real estate developments on 3 continents, a foundation that financed marine conservation projects. The estimated figure of his fortune made Eliza feel slightly dizzy. "So you finally found out?" The voice of Rachel, her roommate, startled her. "I was wondering how long it would take you to realize who your mysterious admirer is." Eliza abruptly closed the magazine. "He's not my admirer. We just talk sometimes." Rachel looked at her skeptically. "Eliza, that man never speaks to the staff. In the 3 years I've been here, I've never seen him take an interest in anyone the way he does with you. Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to see how things would develop," Rachel replied with a mischievous smile. "Besides, you seem to enjoy those moments without the pressure of knowing who he really is." That night, Eliza could barely sleep. Had it all been a farce, a game for the bored millionaire, pretending to be a normal person? Doubts swirled in her mind like the waves against the cliffs. The next morning, Saturday, her day off, she decided to walk on the beach to clear her thoughts. The sea was calm, almost flat, reflecting a sky of an impossible blue. In the distance, some small boats dotted the horizon. "I thought I might find you here." Griffin's voice startled her. He was standing a few feet away, dressed in casual clothes that nonetheless evidenced his natural elegance. "Were you looking for me?" she asked, unable to hide the confusion in her voice. "I asked at the hotel. They told me it was your day off," he admitted, approaching until he stood beside her. "I was hoping to talk to you, outside the context of work." Eliza looked at him directly, gathering courage. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" The question floated between them, rocked by the rhythmic sound of the waves. Griffin sighed deeply. "Because for the first time in years, someone was treating me like a person, not like a bank balance," he replied with an honesty that disarmed her. "When you refused my tip that first day, you completely disconcerted me. Nobody says no to my money, Eliza." She remembered the magazine, the photographs, the empire. "And what do you want from me?" she asked directly. Griffin looked toward the horizon before answering. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I only know that the conversations with you have been the most real thing I've experienced in a long time." They walked in silence along the shore, letting the water lap at their bare feet. In the distance, seagulls traced lazy circles above the cliffs. "My grandmother says we judge people by what they do, not by what they have," Eliza finally said. "So I guess the question is, who are you really, Griffin Blackwood, when no one is watching?" The question hit him with the force of a revelation. No one had posed something like this to him in decades. "I'd like to have the opportunity to show you," he replied with a smile that completely transformed his face, making him seem younger, more vulnerable. "Would you give me that opportunity?" The sun was beginning to descend, projecting elongated shadows on the sand. In that moment of decision, with the sea as a silent witness, Eliza felt she was on the edge of something much bigger than herself. "Yes," she finally replied, "but with one condition." "Anything," he said, and the immediacy of his response revealed much more than he intended. "That it be a fair exchange. You show me your world and I'll show you mine. No pretensions, no masks." Griffin extended his hand to her, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. "Deal," he said as their fingers intertwined, sealing a pact that would change their lives forever. Sometimes courage isn't in leaping into the void, but in allowing oneself to trust when all instincts cry caution, thought Eliza as they made their way back. their silhouettes cut against the kindled sky of the Atlantic sunset. May displayed its splendor over the Rhode Island coast when Griffin fulfilled his part of the deal. On a Sunday morning, he picked up Eliza in a discreet grey car, away from the curious gazes of the hotel staff. "Where are we going?" she asked, noticing that he was driving himself, without the chauffeur, who, according to what she had read, usually accompanied him. "To my favorite place in the world," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "A place where I'm not Griffin Blackwood, the businessman, but simply Griffin." The road wound along the coast for a stretch before heading inland, ascending through hills covered with pines and ancient oaks. The scent of wild roses and ferns infiltrated through the half-open windows, mixing with the marine breeze they were leaving behind. After nearly 2 hours of travel, during which they conversed like old friends about books, music, and childhood memories, they arrived at a secluded area where an old dirt road led into a dense forest. "We'll have to continue on foot," he announced, parking under the shade of a maple tree. The trail, barely visible among the vegetation, led them through an intact New England forest until it opened into a natural clearing. There, perfectly integrated with the surroundings, stood a small stone house with a slate roof and wooden shutters painted green. "Welcome to Whisper Creek," said Griffin, carefully observing her reaction. "My secret refuge." Eliza contemplated with wonder the perfect simplicity of the place. A rustic porch with a wooden table worn by time and weather, pots with aromatic herbs, a vine that was beginning to extend its tendrils over a handcrafted pergola. "It's beautiful," she murmured, genuinely impressed. "So different from what I would have imagined. I bought it 15 years ago, when I wasn't yet who I am now," he explained, as he opened the door with an antique key. "It was in ruins. I restored it with my own hands. It's the only place where I can truly breathe." The interior was a single space, with whitewashed walls and dark wooden beams. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by shelves filled with books. There was no television, no high-tech equipment, just simple and comfortable furniture, and some watercolors of local landscapes hung with discreet taste. "Did you paint these pictures?" asked Eliza, approaching to examine a particularly evocative seascape. Griffin nodded, suddenly inhibited. "It's a hobby I've kept since adolescence. No one knows, of course. It wouldn't match my public image." While he prepared a simple lunch with local products, freshly baked bread, artisanal cheese, sun-ripened tomatoes, extra virgin olive oil, Eliza observed, fascinated, this new facet of Griffin. His movements in the rustic kitchen were confident, relaxed, so different from the tense posture he maintained at the hotel. "Why did you bring me here?" she finally asked, helping him place the plates on the porch table from where a spectacular panorama of undulating hills could be seen. Griffin took his time to respond, serving red wine in simple crystal glasses. "Because I wanted you to see who I am when I'm nobody," he finally said. "This place represents everything I long for and can't have in my daily life. Simplicity, authenticity, peace. And why can't you have it? You're a powerful man. You could change your life if you wanted." A shadow crossed Griffin's face. "It's not that simple. There are responsibilities, expectations, people who depend on my decisions." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "Sometimes we build cages so perfect that we forget we ourselves have the key." That afternoon passed between deep conversations and comfortable silences. They strolled around the surroundings, picked wild berries, and Griffin showed her a small natural pond where, he confessed, he used to bathe on hot summer days. At dusk, sitting on the porch with cups of freshly picked herbal tea, they contemplated how the sun hid behind the hills, tinting the sky with impossible tones. "Your turn will come soon," he said softly. "I want to know your world too, Eliza." She smiled, feeling a mixture of anticipation and fear. "My world is much less impressive than yours." Griffin took her hand with delicacy, a gesture that had become natural between them during that extraordinary day. "You're mistaken," he responded, with an intensity that made her tremble. "Your world has something that mine lost a long time ago: authenticity." Back at the hotel, under a sky studded with stars, Eliza understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She had glimpsed the man behind the fortune, and what she had discovered both terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. "The most important decisions of our lives rarely announce themselves as such," she thought, as she observed Griffin's profile cut against the night. Often they come disguised as ordinary moments, as perfect afternoons that seem suspended in time. The call came on a Tuesday night, just as Eliza was finishing her shift. The trembling voice of her neighbor in Oakville communicated the news. Her grandmother had suffered a relapse and was hospitalized in St. Helena. "It's not serious, girl, but she's asking for you," the woman explained. "You know how Granny Evelyn is, strong as an oak, but at her age—" Without thinking twice, Eliza requested an emergency leave from the hotel. To her surprise, management was not only understanding but surprisingly generous, offering her all the time she needed and assuring her that her position would be waiting for her. Only later would she understand the invisible influence that had facilitated everything. While she was hastily packing her bag, the phone rang again. It was Griffin. "I heard about your grandmother," he said without preamble. "How can I help?" Eliza stopped, surprised both by the news that he was already aware and by the offer. "Thank you, but I'll be fine," she replied, debating between her pride and concern for her grandmother. "I'll take the first bus tomorrow." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Eliza," Griffin's voice acquired a soft but determined tone. "Let me take you. I can have a car ready in half an hour. You'll be with your grandmother before dawn." She wanted to refuse, to maintain the independence that had always been her banner, but the image of her sick grandmother, waiting for her, tipped the balance. "All right," she finally conceded, "but just the trip, I don't need anything else." 3 hours later, they were traveling in silence down the deserted highway. Eliza looked out the window, lost in her thoughts, while Griffin drove with concentration, respecting her emotional space. "My grandmother is everything to me," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "She raised me alone after my parents died in an accident when I was 5 years old." Griffin nodded without taking his eyes off the road. "She must be an extraordinary woman." "She is," confirmed Eliza with a melancholic smile. "Strong, wise, stubborn as a mule. She taught me everything important. To be honest, to work hard, not to judge people by appearances." As they progressed westward, the landscape changed, the gentle hills of Rhode Island gradually giving way to more diverse terrain. When they finally took the exit to California, the first rays of dawn were beginning to outline the silhouettes of the distant mountains. "It's beautiful," murmured Griffin, contemplating the natural spectacle unfolding before them. "Wait until you see Oakville," she replied, and for the first time since receiving the news, a spark of enthusiasm illuminated her voice. "It's nothing like Newport, but it has its own magic." The town appeared like a perfect postcard of wine country. Colorful houses nestled on the slope of a hill, a church tower dominating the ensemble, and extending around it, a green sea of vineyards that was lost on the horizon. After leaving Eliza at the hospital and ensuring that Granny Evelyn was stable, just a scare, the doctor had said, Griffin installed himself in the town's only inn, rejecting Eliza's invitation to stay in her family home. "I don't want to impose," he explained. "Besides, you need time alone with your grandmother." The following days passed in a quiet routine. Eliza spent the mornings at the hospital and the afternoons putting the old family house in order, preparing it for her grandmother's return. To her surprise, Griffin had not returned to New York as she expected, but remained in town, discreet yet present, offering silent help when needed. One afternoon, while Eliza was cleaning the inner courtyard full of pots with geraniums and jasmine, he appeared with a bag of fresh groceries from the local market. "I thought you might need this," he said simply, leaving the provisions on the wooden table. "And also," he took a small bottle from his pocket. "It's a special infusion that Mrs. Thornberry, the herbalist, prepared. She said it would help your grandmother regain her strength." Eliza looked at him with astonishment. "You've been talking with Mrs. Thornberry. She's the most reserved person in town." Griffin shrugged with a smile. "Let's say we have in common an interest in medicinal plants." It was at that moment that Eliza understood that, far from feeling out of place in this humble environment, Griffin seemed more authentic and relaxed than ever. "Come, I want to show you something," she said impulsively, drying her hands on her apron. She led him through a small vegetable garden until they reached a rusty fence that gave onto an abandoned vineyard. The vines, old but resilient, stood like silent sentinels under the relentless June sun. "This was my family's vineyard," she explained with a mixture of pride and sadness, "or at least a small part of it. It extended across the entire hillside to the river, more than 200 acres. The Harlow wine was famous throughout the region. Griffin observed with professional interest the century-old vines. "What happened?" Eliza sighed, leaning on the dilapidated fence. "The usual story. My grandfather died young, leaving debts. A bad harvest year, loans with abusive interest, and before my grandmother could realize, a bank took everything." She paused, absent-mindedly pulling a sprig of wild rosemary. "The only thing she managed to save was the family house, and this small plot too rocky to interest anyone." The silence that followed was loaded with unexpressed emotions. Griffin surveyed the terrain with the expert eye of someone who had evaluated properties on 3 continents, but also with something more, something that Eliza couldn't identify. "These vines could still produce," he finally commented. "They're old varieties, increasingly valued in the gourmet market." She smiled with melancholy. "That's what my grandmother always says, but it would require investment, updated knowledge, contacts in the sector. Things we don't have." The golden light of dusk bathed the vineyard, creating a spectacle of shadows and reflections on the shiny leaves. In this perfect setting, with California's red earth beneath their feet and the aroma of wild herbs floating in the air, Griffin made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "Perhaps I could help," he said cautiously. "I have some contacts in the agricultural sector and resources that could—" "No," Eliza interrupted him firmly. "I appreciate everything you've done, Griffin, but I can't accept more. I don't want to be a charity project." He looked her directly in the eyes, with an intensity that made her tremble. "This isn't about charity, Eliza. It's about investment, in the land, and in us." The word us floated between them, loaded with possibilities that neither of them yet dared to openly name. "Give me time to think," she finally replied, "and to consult with my grandmother. This land is her life." Back at the house, while they prepared a simple dinner together, Eliza observed Griffin moving naturally in the modest kitchen, so different from the elegant settings to which he was accustomed. There was something deeply moving about seeing him cutting tomatoes by the window, with his sleeves rolled up and a concentrated expression. "Sometimes we find our place in the world precisely where we never thought to look," she reflected, as the aroma of olive oil and garlic filled the kitchen, creating an atmosphere of home that neither of them had experienced in a long time. Granny Evelyn's return home was an event in Oakville. The neighbors took turns bringing dishes and desserts. Children brought drawings made especially for the grandmother of all, as they affectionately called her in town, and even the pastor made a visit to bless the house. Amid all the coming and going, Griffin kept discreetly in the background, observing with fascination this display of community affection, so different from the individualistic world in which he usually moved. Eliza found him one afternoon in the backyard, contemplating the golden hills while drinking an herbal infusion. "Anyone would say you're avoiding my grandmother," she commented, sitting beside him on the small stone bench. Griffin smiled with a touch of irony. "Actually, I think she's the one evaluating me from a distance. She has a gaze that seems to go right through you." "She always says she can read people's souls through their eyes," replied Eliza, remembering the countless occasions when her grandmother had correctly judged someone's character with just a look. "So, what's the verdict?" "I still don't know. She looks at me as if I were a puzzle she's trying to solve." The sun was beginning to set, projecting elongated shadows over the stone yard. In the distance, cicadas sang tirelessly among the vineyards. "You should return to New York," Eliza said suddenly. "You've been here almost 2 weeks. Your empire must be wondering where its emperor is." Griffin looked at her with intensity. "Is that what you want, for me to go?" "It's not about what I want," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "It's about reality. We belong to different worlds, Griffin. This, whatever is happening between us, has no future." A silence charged with tension settled between them. Finally, he spoke with controlled voice. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Eliza? That you have a place to belong, roots, identity. I have properties in 6 countries, but no true home." The confession, unexpected and painful, left her speechless. "Griffin, Let me finish, please," he gently interrupted. "Since I arrived here, I've been more at peace with myself than in the last 20 years. It's not just because of you, although you're a fundamental part. It's this place, this simple but meaningful life." He paused, searching for the right words. For the first time in a long time, I can imagine a different future. Eliza felt her heart accelerate, but fear remained there, crouching like a shadow. And what would happen when you tired of simplicity? When you missed the galas, the private jet trips, the business meetings in skyscrapers? That life never made me happy, he replied, with a certainty that surprised her. It only gave me power and security. But what good is all that without someone to share it with? Without a greater purpose than the accumulation of wealth? Before she could respond, Granny Evelyn's voice startled them. "I see you're having an important conversation," said the elderly woman, leaning on her cane in the doorway. "Perhaps it's a good time for the three of us to sit down and talk." With a gesture of her hand, she indicated for them to follow her inside the house. On the kitchen table, next to a pitcher of freshly made lemonade, there were old documents spread out. "I've been reviewing the family papers," she explained, as she served the drink in simple glasses, "including those about the loss of our lands." Eliza looked at her grandmother with surprise. "Gran, I don't think this is the time." "On the contrary, child, it's exactly the time," the elderly woman interrupted her firmly. "Mr. Blackwood, let's not beat around the bush. I know who you are, the whole town knows by now, although they've respected your privacy." Griffin nodded, accepting the situation. "And I also know that your company, Blackwood Holdings, bought 3 years ago the banking conglomerate that took our lands," continued Granny Evelyn, fixing her dark eyes on him. "What I wonder is, if you knew this when you came here." The revelation fell like a bomb. Eliza looked at Griffin with incredulity, seeking in his face the confirmation or denial of this explosive information. "I discovered it a week ago," he admitted after a moment of tension. "When Eliza showed me the vineyard, the name of the place seemed familiar. I made some calls to confirm." "And you didn't think you should tell me?" Eliza's voice trembled with indignation. "I was going to, but I wanted to be sure of all the legal details first," Griffin defended himself. "It's not as simple as it seems. The lands have passed through several hands. There are issues of ownership. There are always complications when it comes to returning what was unjustly taken," intervened Granny Evelyn with surprising calm. "The question is, Mr. Blackwood, what do you intend to do now?" Griffin took a deep breath before responding. "I want to help recover your family's lands," he finally said, "not as a personal favor, but as reparation for an injustice. And I would like—" He looked at Eliza, seeking in her eyes some sign that not everything was lost between them. "I would like to partner with you to revitalize the production. I have the resources and contacts. You have the traditional knowledge and connection to the land." A dense silence filled the kitchen. Outside, the wind whispered among the vineyards, as if the earth itself were holding its breath, waiting for the decision that would be made at that table. "Why?" Eliza finally asked. "Why would you do something like this?" Griffin's response was simple but devastating in its honesty. "Because I love you, and because I want to build something real, something that lasts beyond glass and steel buildings, something with roots as deep as these century-old vines." Granny Evelyn observed the exchange with eyes bright with wisdom. "Love is a good reason," she finally said, "but business is business. If we're going to do this, we'll do it properly, with clear contracts and defined responsibilities." Eliza looked at her grandmother with astonishment. "Are you really considering his proposal?" The elderly woman smiled, revealing the inner strength that had sustained the family through generations. "Child, I've waited 40 years to see our wine shine with its own light again. I'm not going to let this opportunity pass because of pride or fear." Her gaze softened as she added, "Besides, I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him, even though you try to hide it." That night, as Griffin returned to the inn under a star-studded sky, Eliza remained for a long time in the vineyard, letting the night breeze caress her face. She found herself at a crossroads, debating between fear and hope, between clinging to the known or risking an uncertain but potentially wonderful future. The most difficult decisions are those in which we must choose not between good and bad, but between two different paths to happiness, she thought as she contemplated the full moon illuminating the shining vines, silent witnesses to generations of joys and sorrows, of losses and rebirths. The return to Newport happened in a tense silence. Griffin drove concentrated on the road, while Eliza looked out the window, lost in her thoughts. They had agreed to give themselves time, he to prepare the necessary documentation for the return of the lands, she to clarify her feelings and decide if she was willing to embark on an adventure that would change her life forever. The hotel routine welcomed her back as a reminder of the life she had led until then. Double shifts, courteous smiles, tips discreetly slipped into the pocket of her apron. But something had changed within her. The superficial conversations with guests now seemed empty to her, and she found herself constantly looking toward the table by the window, waiting for a presence that didn't appear. Griffin, for his part, had immersed himself again in his world of high-level meetings and corporate decisions. But those who knew him well noticed a subtle change in his behavior. He declined invitations to social events, spent more time personally reviewing documents he had previously delegated, and occasionally stared into infinity, with an expression that oscillated between determination and doubt. On a rainy afternoon in July, almost 3 weeks after their return, Eliza received a letter. The envelope of thick cream-colored paper contained legal documentation and a handwritten note. "Everything is ready. The property will return to your family's hands. No conditions, no strings attached. It's the right thing. What happens afterwards depends entirely on you. With all my affection, G.C." Attached were the property titles, already processed in Evelyn Harlow's name, and a detailed report on the current state of the lands, their productive potential, and the investments necessary to reactivate wine production. Eliza read the documents over and over again, sitting on the small balcony of her room, while the rain beat furiously against the windows like an echo of the storm raging inside her. On one hand, the immense joy of knowing that her grandmother's dream would come true. On the other, confusion in the face of such a grand gesture that seemed to eliminate any possibility of balance between them. How could she correspond to such an act? What could she offer that had comparable value? And above all, a persistent question. Was he doing this out of genuine love, or from the desire for control that characterized powerful men? That night, unable to sleep, she went out to walk on the deserted beach. The raging sea launched furious waves against the rocks, and the salty wind lashed her face with violence. The natural spectacle perfectly reflected her state of mind, a mixture of fury, confusion, and unrecognized yearning. It was then that she saw him. Griffin was standing by the shore, soaked by the rain, looking toward the horizon invisible in the darkness. He seemed as lost as she was, a solitary figure facing his own demons under the storm. "What are you doing here?" shouted Eliza to make herself heard above the roar of the sea. He turned, surprised by her presence. "I needed to think," he replied simply. "The sea always helps me clarify my ideas." They looked at each other in silence, soaked and shivering from the wind, like two castaways on a desert island. "I received the documents," she finally said. "Why did you do it this way? Without consulting me, without waiting?" "Because it was the right thing," he interrupted. "Those lands belong to your family. My company indirectly benefited from an injustice. Returning them isn't generosity, Eliza. It's simple justice." "And the partnership proposal? Have you also renounced that?" Griffin took a step toward her, shortening the physical distance while the emotional one remained an abyss. "That depends on you," he replied with a vulnerability he had never before shown. "I've learned that I can't control everything, no matter how hard I try. Some things, the most important things, must be freely offered, or they have no value." A lightning bolt briefly illuminated the scene, revealing the intensity in their faces, the pain and hope intertwined like the waves breaking at their feet. "I'm afraid," confessed Eliza, letting tears mix with the rain. "Afraid of losing myself in your world, of becoming just another of your properties, of you one day tiring of playing vintner and leaving me with broken dreams and a shattered heart." The brutal honesty of her words hit him harder than the physical storm surrounding them. "I'm afraid too," he admitted, and this confession, coming from a man who had built his life on certainty and control, moved Eliza to her core. "Afraid of not being enough as a man, beyond my money and power. Afraid of not knowing how to love properly, of repeating the mistakes I saw in my family. Afraid of discovering that the only person who has seen the real Griffin decides she doesn't like what she sees." The rain increased, turning the beach into an almost mythical scenario where two souls bared their deepest truths under the unleashed elements. "What if we try?" she finally proposed, her voice barely audible amid the clamor of the storm. "Not the big project, not the business partnership, just us, you and me. discovering each other day by day, building something step by step. Griffin extended his hand to her, an echo of that gesture on the beach months ago, when everything had begun. No pressures, no expectations, he added. Just two people trying to find their way together. Eliza took his hand, feeling through that simple contact a current more powerful than the electricity that occasionally illuminated the sky above their heads. No pressures, she repeated, but with hope. At that instant, as if nature wanted to seal their pact, the rain suddenly subsided, and among the clouds that were beginning to disperse, a solitary star appeared, bright and clear, like a promise amid the darkness. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't facing an external storm, but those we carry within, thought Eliza as they walked back along the shore, their hands intertwined like a fragile but resistant bridge over the abyss they had begun to cross together. August brought with it a scorching heat and significant changes. Following Granny Evelyn's advice, they decided to start with a pilot project, restoring a small part of the vineyard for the next harvest, while developing a more ambitious, long-term plan. To the surprise of many, Griffin Blackwood, the real estate magnate, began to spend more and more time in Oakville, learning about grafting, irrigation systems, and pruning techniques. The locals, initially wary, gradually accepted him as they saw him working side by side with local farmers, his perfectly manicured hands slowly transforming into those of someone who knows the value of physical work. Eliza, for her part, had reduced her hours at the hotel to dedicate more time to the project. She discovered in herself a natural talent for business that she had never had the opportunity to develop, avidly absorbing the knowledge Griffin shared about marketing, distribution strategies, and international certifications. Their relationship evolved at its own pace, building on shared moments, dawns contemplating the sunrise over the vineyards, simple dinners under the stars, deep conversations about their hopes and fears. Kisses came naturally, as an extension of the emotional intimacy they had developed, and with them, a new dimension of connection that surprised both of them with its intensity. However, not everything was idyllic. The first major test came at the end of the month, when Griffin had to urgently return to New York to manage a business crisis. What was supposed to be a 2-day absence extended to 2 weeks, during which communication was reduced to brief phone calls and hasty messages. When he finally returned, something had changed. A subtle tension, almost imperceptible, hung between them. "What's wrong?" asked Eliza one afternoon as they walked together along the boundaries of the newly restored vineyard. "You've been distant since you came back." Griffin sighed, stopping under the shade of a century-old grapevine. "My world is calling me back, Eliza," he admitted with a tired voice. "The New York crisis was just the beginning. There are important decisions I must make. Investors who demand my presence, projects on 3 continents that need my personal attention." "I understand," she replied, although a knot formed in her throat. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." "It's not just that," he continued, running a hand through his hair with a frustrated gesture. "It's the board of directors. They're questioning my recent decisions, especially my inexplicable interest in a small Napa Valley vineyard. They insinuate that I'm getting distracted." The word floated between them, loaded with painful implications. Distraction. As if what they were building together was a passing whim, an entertainment that interfered with truly important matters. "And are you?" she asked directly. "Getting distracted?" Their gazes met in a silent but intense duel. "No," he replied firmly. "I'm rediscovering what truly matters. But convincing a group of financial sharks that there's value beyond quarterly balances is complicated." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken words. Eliza felt that something precious was slipping through her fingers, like the water that nourished the vineyards, impossible to retain if the earth wasn't prepared to receive it. "Perhaps we should take some time," she finally suggested, the words leaving her mouth like sharp stones. "For you to resolve your affairs without distractions." Griffin looked at her with a mixture of surprise and pain. "Is that what you want?" "It's not about what I want," she replied, unconsciously repeating the words she had pronounced months earlier in her grandmother's yard. "It's about what's possible, what's realistic." Before he could respond, the strident sound of his cell phone broke the moment. An emergency call, another crisis, another demand for his time and attention. "I need to take this," he said with resignation. "But this conversation isn't over, Eliza." However, in a way it was. Something had fundamentally changed in that exchange, as if a veil had been pulled back, revealing obstacles that had been there from the beginning, patiently waiting to be recognized. That night, while Griffin worked late on his laptop, attending video conferences with executives in 3 different time zones, Eliza walked alone to the small chapel on top of the hill. The place, humble but impregnated with centuries of prayers and hopes, offered her the consolation she needed. "I don't know what to do, Gran," she confessed later, sitting next to Granny Evelyn in the moonlit yard. "His world is so different, so relentless." The elderly woman, whose health had notably improved since they recovered the lands, observed her with wise eyes. "True love is never simple, child," she finally said. "It always requires sacrifices. The question is whether what you gain compensates for what you must surrender." "And how do I know that?" "You don't know," the elderly woman replied with simplicity. "You feel it. Here," she pointed to her heart, "and here," she touched her forehead. "When both are in harmony, you have your answer." The next day, Griffin returned to New York, promising to come back in a week. But both he and Eliza knew that something fundamental was at stake, that the next phase of their relationship would depend on decisions that went far beyond agricultural projects or business strategies. It was, in essence, about choosing between 2 worlds that seemed irreconcilable, or perhaps, though neither of them yet dared to formulate it, about creating a new one where both could exist in balance. Sometimes we must move away to see clearly. Other times it's precisely in the distance where we discover what we cannot bear to lose, reflected Eliza as she watched Griffin's car disappear in the distance, taking with it a part of her heart that no longer fully belonged to her. September arrived with winds of change. Griffin's absence, initially scheduled for a week, extended to 2, then to 3. The calls, frequent at first, gradually spaced out, always interrupted by corporate emergencies or unavoidable meetings. Eliza immersed herself in the vineyard work with renewed determination, as if each restored vine, each cleaned furrow, each installed irrigation system was a way to keep the connection with him alive. The nights, however, were moments of doubt and reflection, interminable hours contemplating the ceiling of her room, debating between hope and the fear of abandonment. "He's pulling away, isn't he?" she asked her grandmother one afternoon, as they selected grapes for artisanal wine. Granny Evelyn, always direct, didn't try to sugarcoat reality. "Power is a jealous mistress, child. It doesn't share easily." "But he's not like that," defended Eliza, though her voice betrayed her own uncertainty. "He's more than his empire, more than his money." "Of course he is," nodded the elderly woman. "But the habits of a lifetime don't change in a few months. And the world he moves in has its own rules, its own demands." That night when the phone rang past midnight, Eliza instinctively knew that something important had happened. "I need to see you." Griffin's voice sounded tense, almost unrecognizable. "There's something I must tell you in person." 24 hours later, they met on the Newport beach where everything had begun. The day was grey with low clouds that presaged a storm, an appropriate setting for the conversation that was about to unfold. Griffin looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and days of constant tension. But there was something else, a determination in his gaze that Eliza couldn't interpret. "The board of directors has voted," he said, without preamble, after an embrace that seemed too brief. "They want me to focus exclusively on Asian expansion, 3 years minimum, based in Hong Kong." The news hit Eliza like an icy wave. 3 years, an ocean of distance, a completely different life. "I understand," she said, struggling to maintain her composure. "It's a great opportunity for you." "It is," he confirmed, "but I told them no." The revelation left her momentarily speechless. "You did what?" "I presented my resignation as CEO," continued Griffin, and for the first time since she had known him, Eliza saw a mixture of terror and liberation in his eyes. "I'll continue to be the principal shareholder, but I'll leave the daily management in the hands of my team." "Griffin," she murmured, feeling the world stagger beneath her feet. "Why would you do something like that?" He took her hands in his, a gesture of intimacy that contrasted with the formality of his words. "Because during these weeks apart, I've understood something fundamental. I've spent my entire life building an empire that doesn't make me happy. He paused, searching for the precise words. I've conquered markets on 3 continents, but never had a real home. I've accumulated more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I still feel empty inside. A solitary seagull soared above their heads, its cry mixing with the constant rumor of the waves. I don't want you to give up everything for me, said Eliza, though her heart raced wildly at the possibility opening before them. I couldn't live with that responsibility. I'm not doing it for you, he replied with a sad smile. I'm doing it for me, for the man I want to be, for the life I want to live. You simply showed me that there exists another way of existing, one where value isn't measured in bank figures, but in moments of authenticity. The first drops of rain began to fall, thick and spaced, like tears from the sky that reflected the intensity of the moment. And what will you do now? She asked, barely conscious of the rain that was beginning to soak them. I have some ideas, he responded, and for the first time in weeks a genuine smile illuminated his face. More personal projects, investments with purpose, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to dedicate more time to a certain vineyard in Napa that has extraordinary potential. Eliza felt a whirlwind of contradictory emotions, joy at having him back, fear in the face of such a radical change, guilt for being, even though he denied it, part of the reason for his decision. I'm afraid that one day you'll regret it, she confessed, that you'll wake up one morning and miss your old life, your power, your influence. It's possible, he admitted, with the honesty that disarmed her. I don't have all the answers, Eliza. I only know that I'm willing to risk it to discover it day by day. To build something new, something ours. The rain was now increasing, turning the beach into a blurred landscape where only the 2 of them remained, like characters in a play whose outcome was yet to be written. And if we fail, she asked, giving voice to her deepest fear. Griffin looked at her with an intensity that transcended words. Then we will have failed together, trying something that was worth it. Isn't that better than wondering all our lives what would have happened if we had had the courage to try? At that moment, as if responding to an unformulated question, the sky opened in a deluge that completely drenched them in seconds. And amid that unleashed storm, Eliza found her answer. She approached him and, taking his face in her hands, kissed him with a passion that contained all her doubts and certainties, all her fears and hopes. It was a kiss of acceptance, of commitment, of a leap into the void with the confidence that somehow they would find the way together. There are abysses that can only be crossed by closing our eyes and taking a step forward, she thought as they separated, panting and smiling under the torrential rain, like 2 castaways who had finally found their island amid the storm. Autumn brought with it the first harvest from the restored vineyard. It was modest compared to what it had been in its days of glory, but for Eliza, Granny Evelyn and Griffin, it represented much more than a simple agricultural production. It was the tangible symbol of a rebirth, both of the land and of themselves. Griffin's transition had not been simple. After 2 decades directing a financial empire, adapting to the more leisurely rhythm of rural life represented a daily challenge. There were days when his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from former partners or employees who needed his advice, and nights when Eliza found him working until dawn, immersed in reports and projections. However, there was a peace in him that hadn't existed before, an authenticity in his gestures and words that contrasted with the mask of relentless efficiency he had worn for years. Sometimes I wonder if you're really happy here, commented Eliza one afternoon, as they classified freshly harvested grapes in the small shed they had set up. Griffin looked up from his task, his hands stained by the green juice of the grapes, a detail that months ago would have been unthinkable. You know what's strangest? He replied with a reflective smile. That I feel more alive waking at dawn to check the irrigation system than in any of the board meetings where I decided the fate of billions. The project advanced at a good pace. They had hired several neighbors from town, many of them former workers of the Harlow vineyards, who contributed invaluable traditional knowledge. Griffin, for his part, had implemented sustainable technologies that increased efficiency without compromising the artisanal quality of the product. We'll need to think of a name for our wine, said Granny Evelyn one night, as they dined in the yard under a sky full of stars. Something that honors the past but looks to the future. Eliza, suggested Griffin, looking with tenderness at the woman who had changed his life. As a promise of renewal. Eliza shook her head, smiling. Too obvious, she replied. Besides, it's not just my project, it's ours. All three of us. It was Granny Evelyn who found the solution, with that simple wisdom that characterized her. New dawn, she said with a serene voice, because that's what it represents. A new beginning for all of us. The idea was welcomed with enthusiasm, and soon they were working on the label design, promotional materials, and commercialization strategy. Griffin contributed his contacts in the world of high gastronomy, while Eliza took charge of the image and the story behind the product, emphasizing traditional methods and respect for the land. Not everything was work, however. As autumn advanced, they found time to rediscover the region together. Excursions to Sonoma, strolls through the streets of neighboring towns, Sunday afternoons exploring local fairs. In each of these outings, Eliza observed with fascination how Griffin transformed, leaving behind the invisible suit of power he had worn for decades. One afternoon, visiting a small museum of traditional arts in San Francisco, Eliza noticed that he lingered in front of an old loom, carefully observing the complex patterns of a hand-woven blanket. My maternal grandmother was a weaver, he commented in a soft voice, almost as if speaking to himself. She came from a town in New England, not far from where I grew up. I used to sit beside her for hours watching her work. She created entire worlds with her hands. You never told me about her, said Eliza, moved by this unexpected revelation. Griffin smiled with melancholy. There are many parts of me that were buried under layers of success, he replied. Memories, dreams, connections, sacrificed on the altar of progress and ambition. But now they're coming back, she observed, intertwining her fingers with his. Thanks to you, he nodded. You've given me back parts of myself that I thought were lost forever. That period of mutual rediscovery was not exempt from challenges. Griffin's adaptation to a radically different lifestyle provoked occasional moments of frustration or doubt. Sometimes Eliza found him abstracted, looking at the horizon with an indecipherable expression, and feared he might be reconsidering his decision. On a particularly cold November morning, while they were inspecting a newly planted sector with young vines, Griffin received a call that left him visibly disturbed. It was Lin Wei, my contact in Hong Kong, he explained after hanging up. The Asian expansion I refused is generating record profits. According to his calculations, I would have doubled my fortune in 18 months. Eliza felt her heart shrink. Do you regret it? She asked directly, faithful to the honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Griffin contemplated the young vines, just fragile stems that would struggle for years before giving their first significant fruit. No, he finally replied, and the certainty in his voice dissipated Eliza's fears. What we're building here can't be measured in terms of quarterly profitability. It's an investment in life, in future, in true legacy. That night, while they prepared a simple dinner together, Griffin seemed especially thoughtful. What are you thinking about? Asked Eliza, noticing his distant gaze as he cut vegetables for a homemade soup. About how my definition of success has changed, he replied, with a reflective smile. Before it was about numbers in a report, taller buildings, conquered territories. Now, he looked around, at the modest but cozy kitchen, at Eliza with her grandmother's apron, at the aroma of rosemary and thyme floating in the air. Now I know that true success is in moments like this, in creating something with purpose, in having a place I can truly call home. Eliza approached and kissed him softly, a caress that contained unspoken promises. Welcome home, then, she murmured against his lips. Sometimes the smallest seeds give rise to the strongest trees, she thought as they finished preparing dinner, moving in perfect synchrony, as if they had spent a lifetime sharing that space. And sometimes the most unexpected paths lead exactly where we needed to be. December arrived with an unusual cold for California. The vineyards, robust but dormant, profiled against skies of a crystalline blue, while the surrounding mountains occasionally appeared shrouded in mist, creating postcards of breathtaking beauty. The first production of New Dawn had been bottled and was beginning to be distributed in selected markets. Thanks to Griffin's contacts, several Michelin-starred restaurants had incorporated the wine into their menus, generating a demand that far exceeded the modest initial production. "We'll need to expand for the next season," commented Griffin one morning, as they reviewed pending orders in the small office they had set up in what was once a storage room. "And hire more staff?" Eliza nodded, still amazed by how quickly the project had taken off. "The Thompsons are interested in selling their plot," she replied. "It borders our northern sector. It would be a natural expansion." Griffin looked at her with a smile of pride mixed with something deeper, more personal. "You know what? I love when you talk like this, like a true businesswoman." She blushed slightly. "I learned from the best," she replied, winking. "Besides, I have business in my blood, according to my grandmother." The mentioned grandmother was, in fact, an increasingly active figure in the project. At 78 years old, Granny Evelyn had recovered a vitality that amazed everyone. She personally supervised the quality of the wine, taught traditional techniques to younger workers, and didn't hesitate to give her opinion on any aspect of the business, from packaging to cultivation methods. "That woman is a force of nature," commented Griffin one afternoon, after the elderly woman had firmly corrected him on the optimal time for winter pruning. "Now I understand where you got your character from." Eliza smiled, observing her grandmother directing with natural authority men twice her size. "She has overcome more difficulties than we can imagine," she replied with pride. "She was widowed young, lost these lands, raised me alone, and never lost hope or dignity." As winter advanced, her relationship with Griffin reached new depths. They lived together in the family house, a decision that had been taken so naturally that they barely remembered having formally discussed it. The cold nights found them nestled by the fireplace, sharing dreams, fears, and plans for the future, slowly building an intimacy that transcended the physical. On a particularly cold night, while a rare frost covered the vineyard with a white blanket, Griffin seemed especially thoughtful. "What's wrong?" asked Eliza, snuggled against him under a blanket knitted by her grandmother years ago. He took a moment to respond, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "I was thinking about how different my life would have been if you hadn't spilled that old-fashioned," he finally said. Eliza smiled at the memory. "Technically, I was the one who spilled it, and I was the one lucky enough to be there to witness it," he replied, softly kissing her forehead. "Sometimes I wonder if chance really exists, or if there's a secret order in the universe that leads us exactly where we need to be." "My grandmother would say it's destiny," commented Eliza, "that some souls are destined to meet, regardless of circumstances." "And what do you think?" She reflected for a moment before responding. "I think life offers us opportunities, moments of choice, and that what's truly important isn't the initial meeting, but all the small decisions we make afterward to continue choosing each other day after day." Griffin looked at her with admiration. "That's a much deeper vision than mine," he admitted. "I simply thank that you decided to work an extra shift that day." They both laughed, aware of how small, seemingly insignificant decisions could completely alter the course of a life. The culmination of that season of internal blossoming came in mid-December, when they received news that New Dawn had been selected as a finalist in a prestigious international wine competition. The ceremony would take place in New York the following month. "All three of us will have to go," declared Granny Evelyn, with an authority that admitted no discussion. "It's the recognition of our joint effort." For Eliza, the prospect of presenting herself at such a high-caliber event, alongside established producers and sector experts, was intimidating. For Griffin, it meant facing publicly for the first time his new identity. No longer the real estate magnate, but the artisanal wine producer. "Are you nervous?" Eliza asked him one night, as they selected which samples they would take to the competition. "Curiously, no," he replied after a moment of reflection. "In my previous life, every public appearance was a carefully rehearsed performance. Now, I'm simply myself, talking about something I'm passionate about. It's liberating." The week prior to the trip to New York was full of preparations. Eliza designed a small stand that would reflect the essence of the project. Traditional, but innovative, rooted in family history, but with a vision for the future. Griffin took charge of the logistics and prepared a presentation on the sustainable production methods they had implemented. The night before their departure, while they were finishing packing, Eliza found Griffin in the vineyard, contemplating the stars with a serene expression. "A penny for your thoughts," she asked, wrapping herself in a shawl to protect against the night chill. He smiled when he saw her approach. "I was thinking about cycles," he replied. "About how life sometimes takes us exactly to the starting point, but with a completely new perspective." "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow I return to New York, where I spent so many years pursuing a type of success that now seems empty to me," he explained. "But I return as a different person, with different values, with a different purpose." Eliza intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the deep connection they had developed during those months of shared work, of intertwined dreams, of a future built stone by stone. "You're not returning as a different person," she gently corrected. "You're returning as the person you always were deep down, beneath all those layers of expectations and pressures." Griffin looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you always manage to see the best in me, even when I forget it myself?" "Because I love you," she replied with simplicity. "Not the businessman, not the wine producer, but the man who is at the center of all that. The one who is afraid but goes forward anyway. The one who doubts but chooses with his heart. The one who had the courage to change everything for something he truly believes in." Under the starry mantle of the California sky, surrounded by the silent vines that had witnessed their transformation, they sealed that declaration with a kiss that tasted of promise, of future, of shared certainty. "True blossoming often occurs in the most unexpected moments," thought Eliza as they returned to the house, their silhouettes cut against the clear night. "Sometimes in the middle of winter, when everything seems dormant, but life is simply gathering strength for its next rebirth." New York received them with a dry cold and a clear sky that contrasted with California's mild climate. The hotel where the competition was being held was a historic building in the heart of the city, with high-ceilinged halls and crystal chandeliers that Eliza observed with a mixture of admiration and nostalgia, remembering her days as a waitress in Newport. "It feels strange to be here as an exhibitor, and not as staff," she commented, as they set up their modest stand among producers with decades of tradition and international prestige. Griffin, busy arranging the samples, smiled understandingly. "Life takes unexpected turns," he replied. "A year ago I was closing a billion-dollar deal in a skyscraper in this very New York. And look at me now, worried about whether the ambient temperature will affect the taste of our wine." Granny Evelyn, impressive in a traditional Napa Valley outfit she had insisted on wearing so they know where we come from, supervised every detail with a critical eye. "Less talk and more action," she reprimanded them affectionately. "The judges will start circulating in an hour." The first day of the event passed in a whirlwind of presentations, tastings, and conversations with other producers, distributors, and gastronomic critics. To Eliza's surprise, the interest in New Dawn exceeded all her expectations. The story behind the wine, the recovery of family lands, the combination of traditional methods with sustainable technology, resonated in a sector increasingly interested in authenticity and ethical production. Griffin, for his part, discovered that his previous business experience, far from being an obstacle, constituted an unexpected advantage. He knew how to speak the language of international distributors, understood the complexities of exportation, and saw market opportunities that other more traditional producers overlooked. "You make a formidable team," commented one of the judges after tasting their wine. "One can tell there's passion and knowledge in every step of the process." That night, dining in a small restaurant away from the bustle of downtown, Granny Evelyn raised her wine glass with a solemn gesture. "To you both," she said with a firm voice, "for finding love and purpose in the same place. There's no greater blessing in life." The second day, however, brought an unexpected challenge. While Eliza attended the stand, Griffin excused himself to take a call. When he returned, his expression had completely changed. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, recognizing the signs of tension she had learned to read in his face. "It was my lawyer," he replied in a low voice, leading her to a discreet corner. "There's a problem. A group of minority investors has filed a lawsuit against me for abandonment of fiduciary responsibilities. They allege that my decision to leave daily management has significantly harmed the company's value." "But that's absurd," exclaimed Eliza. "You left a competent team in charge. You're still the principal shareholder." "It's a political maneuver," explained Griffin with a tired gesture. "They never agreed with my decision. Now that some investments haven't given the expected results, they're using me as a scapegoat." What are you going to do? Griffin sighed deeply. I have to fly to Tokyo immediately. The board of directors is in panic. The shareholders demand answers. And if I don't intervene personally, there could be a fall in the stock price that would affect thousands of employees. The impact of his words fell on Eliza like a bucket of ice water. The world they thought they had left behind was returning to claim what it considered its own. How long? She asked, trying to maintain her composure. I don't know, he admitted. Weeks, maybe months. It depends on how complicated the situation is. I have to review contracts, reassure key partners, possibly restructure some divisions. The reality of their situation imposed itself with painful clarity. They had built a beautiful bubble, a world of their own based on shared passion and meaningful work. But the outside world, with its relentless demands and unavoidable commitments, had not disappeared. I understand, Eliza finally said, and she truly did understand, although understanding didn't mitigate the pain. You have responsibilities, people who depend on you. Griffin took her hands in his, with a barely contained desperation. This doesn't change anything between us, he affirmed vehemently. It's a temporary setback. I'll resolve this crisis and come back. I promise. Eliza nodded, wanting to believe him. But a little voice inside whispered doubt she couldn't completely ignore. What if this was just the first of many temporary setbacks? What if the life they had begun to build together was too fragile to resist the forces trying to tear them apart? That night, while Griffin made arrangements for his urgent trip, Eliza found herself alone with Granny Evelyn in the hotel room. You knew this could happen, didn't you? She asked her grandmother, who was calmly knitting by the window. The elderly woman looked at her with those wise eyes that seemed to see everything. Life rarely follows the path we plan, child, she replied. What's important isn't the obstacles, but how we decide to face them. I'm afraid, Gran, confessed Eliza, allowing herself for the first time to express the vulnerability she felt. Afraid that this is just the beginning, that his world will end up dragging him back further and further away from me. Granny Evelyn set aside her knitting and took her granddaughter's hands in hers, rough from decades of work, but infinitely warm. True love isn't possession, Eliza, she said softly. It's freedom, the freedom to choose the other each day, especially when it would be easier not to. And if he chooses that other world, then you'll know he was honest in his choice, replied the elderly woman. And although it hurts, it's better to love and lose than to protect your heart behind walls of fear. At dawn, they accompanied Griffin to the airport. The moment of farewell was brief but intense, loaded with unspoken words and silent promises. I'll be back for the spring harvest, he affirmed, clinging to a future that suddenly seemed less certain. Keep me informed about everything. The new grafts, the expansion, the sales. I want to continue being part of this, even at a distance. Eliza nodded, containing the tears that threatened to overflow. Go and do what you must do, she said, with a strength she didn't know she possessed. We'll be here. The last kiss tasted of farewell, although neither of them wanted to acknowledge it. As the plane took off, taking Griffin to a world that had once been his entire life, Eliza wondered if they had been naive to believe they could so completely redefine their lives, ignoring the ties and responsibilities of the past. That same afternoon, during the award ceremony, New Dawn received the silver medal in the category of First Harvest Wines, an extraordinary recognition for such a young product. When Eliza and Granny Evelyn went up to the stage to receive the award, Griffin's absence was felt as an empty space between them, a physical reminder of the forces trying to separate them. Sometimes the supreme test of love isn't in the dramatic grand gestures, but in the daily will to continue choosing each other, despite distance, uncertainty, and fear, reflected Eliza that night, as she contemplated the medal that symbolized both their achievement and the price they were paying for it. Spring arrived in Oakville with an explosion of colors and aromas. The fields were covered with wild poppies and daisies, bees buzzed among the flowers, and the vineyards, eternal sentinels of the Napa landscape, were beginning to show the first signs of a promising harvest. 3 months had passed since Griffin's departure. 3 months of daily calls that gradually spaced to weekly, of promises of imminent return that always found a new obstacle, of lonely nights when Eliza fell asleep with the phone next to her pillow, waiting for a message that arrived later and later. The situation is more complex than I imagined, he explained in each conversation. The investors demand personal guarantees. The board is divided. I need to completely restructure the Asian division. The technical explanations succeeded one another, each extending his absence a little more. Eliza, meanwhile, had immersed herself completely in the vineyard project. The medal obtained in New York had opened unexpected doors. Exclusive distributors, high-end restaurants, even a prestigious Japanese gourmet shop chain interested in importing their wine. "We need to decide about the expansion," she told her grandmother one morning, as they reviewed the newly acquired lands. "If we want to satisfy these new orders, we'll have to plant at least 200 more vines." Granny Evelyn, whose health seemed to strengthen as the project grew, nodded with a thoughtful expression. "Have you consulted with Griffin?" Eliza sighed, adjusting the straw hat that protected her from the spring sun. "I tried yesterday. He was in the middle of a meeting in Singapore. He said he trusted my judgment." An eloquent silence settled between them. Both knew what that response meant. Griffin was being gradually absorbed by the whirlwind of his old life, moving away day by day from the shared dream they had begun to build. "You should go see him," said Granny Evelyn suddenly. "Surprise him on his own turf." "What?" Eliza looked at her grandmother with amazement. "I can't just show up in New York or Singapore or wherever he is. There's too much work here the next harvest." "The work will always be waiting," the elderly woman interrupted her firmly. "But there are moments in life that don't come back, moments when we must fight for what we love, or resign ourselves to losing it." That night, as she contemplated the stars from the yard, in the same place where she had so often shared dreams and silences with Griffin, Eliza made her decision. She wouldn't give up without a fight. She wouldn't allow distance and circumstances to dictate the end of their story. 3 days later, she was landing at Tokyo's Narita airport with a small suitcase and her heart beating wildly. She hadn't notified Griffin of her arrival, following her grandmother's advice. "If you tell him you're coming, he'll find a reason to be somewhere else." Men are like that when they're afraid of their own feelings. The receptionist at the imposing Blackwood Tower in downtown Tokyo looked at her curiously when she requested to see Mr. Blackwood without an appointment. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Blackwood is in a very important meeting with Japanese investors," she explained with cold professionalism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," admitted Eliza, "but I've come from the United States to see him. She hesitated a moment before continuing. "His partner in the New Dawn project." Something in her tone or in the determination of her gaze must have impressed the receptionist, because after a brief phone call, she handed her a visitor's pass. "Floor 50. His assistant will receive you." The high-speed elevator took her to a world that seemed to come from another dimension. Polished marble floors, contemporary art on the walls, impeccably dressed executives moving with the precision of chess pieces on an invisible board. Griffin's assistant, an efficient young man with designer glasses and a perfectly cut suit, received her with a rehearsed smile. "Miss Harlow, welcome. Mr. Blackwood will be with you as soon as he finishes his meeting." "May I offer you anything while you wait?" "No, thank you," replied Eliza, suddenly feeling out of place with her simple dress and flat shoes. "How long?" "It shouldn't take more than an hour," the assistant interrupted, consulting his tablet. "Meanwhile, you can wait in his private office. It has a spectacular view of Tokyo Bay." Griffin's office was exactly as one might expect from the CEO of a financial empire. Spacious, minimalist, dominated by a glass and steel desk that seemed to float above the pearl-grey carpet. An entire wall of windows offered, indeed, a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. Eliza slowly toured the space, looking for some sign of the man she had known in California. There were no personal photos, no mementos, nothing that indicated the personality of its occupant. It was a space designed to impress, not to reveal. She was about to give up when she saw it. On a small side table, partially hidden behind some reports, a bottle of New Dawn with the silver label they had designed together. And next to it, a small digital frame that showed, in slow rotation, images of the vineyard, of Granny Evelyn supervising the harvest, of Eliza smiling under the Californian sun. Something loosened in her chest upon seeing those images. Perhaps not everything was lost. Perhaps amid this world of glass and steel, Griffin still maintained a connection with the life they had begun to build together. The sound of the door opening startled her. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Griffin, who looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. "Eliza," he murmured, as if pronouncing her name might make her disappear. "What are you doing here?" She straightened up, gathering all her courage. "I came to find you," she replied simply. "To remind you that there's a vineyard in Napa that's waiting for you. And so am I." For a moment, time seemed to stop. They looked at each other in silence, separated by the physical distance but also by the months of absence, by the decisions not taken, by the words not said. Finally, Griffin closed the door behind him and advanced toward her. "I shouldn't be surprised," he said with a smile that completely transformed his tense face. "You've always been the brave one between us." "It's not bravery," she replied. "It's love. And fear of losing you." The honesty of her words seemed to break something inside him. In 2 steps he bridged the distance separating them and embraced her with an intensity that spoke of lonely nights, of contained yearning, of decisions postponed for fear of the consequences. "I'm so sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I let myself get caught again. The crisis, the responsibilities, the expectations. Everything kept getting more complicated, and each day it was harder to find the moment to return." Eliza separated slightly to look him in the eyes. "Do you want to return?" she asked directly. "Really?" "More than anything in the world," he replied without hesitation. "This place," he made a gesture encompassing the luxurious office, "means nothing to me. It's just a golden cage. My life, my future is there with you under the vineyard sun." "Then what's holding you back?" Griffin sighed deeply. "Responsibility. Thousands of employees depend on my decisions, investors who trusted me, a legacy I built over decades." "I understand all that," said Eliza softly, "but life is too short to live it fulfilling the expectations of others. You deserve to be happy, Griffin. We deserve to build something together." They looked at each other in silence, the noise of the city a distant murmur beyond the windows. "Give me a week," he finally said, with a determination that reminded her of the man she had known in California. "A week to put everything in order, to transfer responsibilities, to make sure no one suffers because of my decision. And then, I'll come home." "To our home? Do you promise?" As an answer, Griffin approached his desk and pressed the intercom. "Tanaka, cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day," he ordered, "and book 2 tickets to San Francisco for next Thursday. I'm going to show Miss Harlow around Tokyo." The astonishment in the assistant's voice was evident even through the intercom. "Excuse me, sir?" "Should I also cancel tomorrow's meeting with the board?" "Especially that one," confirmed Griffin, without taking his eyes off Eliza. "And prepare the documents for my definitive retirement as CEO. It's time for the new generation to take over." The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Griffin took her to explore Tokyo, showing her his favorite places in the city, small corners that contradicted his image of a ruthless magnate. A hidden cafe in Shibuya, where he had written his first business plans. An ancient bookstore where he spent hours on Sundays. A specific bench in Ueno Park, where he came to think when decisions became too heavy. At the same time, he worked tirelessly on the transition of his power in the company, preparing his team to function without him, ensuring that each responsibility was left in capable hands. "It's strange," he commented one night, as they dined on the terrace of his apartment with views of the illuminated Tokyo skyline. "For years I believed I was indispensable, that everything would collapse without my constant control. Now I see that I've built something stronger than myself, something that can continue without me." "That's a true legacy," observed Eliza. "Not buildings or bank accounts, but creating something that transcends its creator." He looked at her with admiration. "You're wise for someone so young." "It's not wisdom," she smiled. "I just had a good teacher." On the morning of their departure, Griffin took her to one last place, the small apartment in a Tokyo suburb where he had begun his career in Asia decades ago. "This is where it all started," he explained, as they climbed the stairs of the modest building. To a boy with big dreams and a student loan that seemed impossible to pay off. The apartment now belonged to someone else, but the current owner, a young artist, let them in when Griffin explained his story. "I wanted to come back one last time," he said as he toured the tiny space, "to close the circle, to remember that my whole life has been a journey of searching, and that I finally found what I was really looking for in the most unexpected place." That afternoon, as the plane took off heading for the United States, Eliza rested her head on Griffin's shoulder, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in months. "Are you sure you won't regret it?" she asked, giving voice to the last doubt that still persisted in her heart. He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "The only thing I would regret would be not living the life I truly desire," he replied with certainty. "A life of purpose, of creation, of connection with the land and with the people I love. A life with you, under the vineyard sun." The return to Oakville was received with a discreet celebration. Granny Evelyn, with her usual perspicacity, had prepared a special dinner, inviting the vineyard workers and some close neighbors who had become an essential part of the project. "To the return of the prodigal son," toasted the elderly woman, raising her glass with an enigmatic smile, "and to the paths we travel to find our true home." That night, under a star-studded sky, Griffin took Eliza to the vineyard. Among the vines, silvered by the moonlight, he knelt and took out a small hand-carved box of vinewood. "I wanted to do this here," he said with an emotional voice. "In the place that united us, among these vines that have seen generations pass and will continue here long after we're gone." Upon opening the box, he revealed a simple but beautiful ring, a gold band with small silver inlays that resembled grape leaves. "Eliza Harlow," he continued, taking her hand, "you taught me the value of authenticity. You reminded me who I really am, beneath all the masks I had accumulated. You showed me that true wealth is in meaningful connections, in work with purpose, in a life lived in harmony with our deepest values. Would you do me the honor of sharing that life with me, as my wife, my partner, my companion in adventures?" Tears glistened in Eliza's eyes, reflecting the light of the moon and the infinite stars above them. "Yes," she replied simply. "In this vineyard and wherever life may take us." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been waiting there forever. The next morning, with the first rays of sun filtering through the branches of the vines, Eliza and Griffin walked the land, planning the expansion, discussing new cultivation techniques, dreaming of the future of New Dawn. Granny Evelyn observed them from a distance, her small figure silhouetted against the intense blue sky, a smile of satisfaction illuminating her face, weathered by sun and years. "You know what I was thinking?" commented Griffin, stopping to contemplate the landscape that stretched before them, undulating and beautiful like a green-silver sea. "That we could build a small house here, among the vines. A simple but comfortable place, with large windows to see the sunrise. A home for our family." Eliza smiled, instinctively bringing a hand to her belly, where a secret was growing that she hadn't yet shared with him. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she replied. "A place to put down roots to watch our children grow alongside these vines." Griffin looked at her attentively, capturing the gesture and its meaning with an intuition that had sharpened during their shared months. "Eliza, is there something you want to tell me?" She nodded, with tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "I found out just before traveling to Tokyo. I wanted to be sure before telling you. We're going to be parents." The joy that illuminated Griffin's face was like a sunrise itself, a promise of bright days to come. "A new life," he murmured, embracing her with reverence, as if holding something infinitely precious. "A new beginning. For all of us," she nodded, feeling a fullness that transcended words. As the sun ascended in the California sky, bathing the vineyard with its golden light, Eliza thought about the long road traveled since that spilled old-fashioned at the hotel, about the doubts and fears overcome, the brave decisions, the risks that had been worth taking. "Sometimes destiny announces itself with stumbles," she reflected, contemplating the ring on her finger and the future unfolding before them, as promising as the young vines that were beginning to take root in California's red earth. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing oneself to be truly happy. In that perfect moment, with the man she loved by her side, and a new life growing inside her, under the vineyard sun that had witnessed their story from the beginning, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that they had found their place in the world. A place of authenticity, of shared purpose, of true love that, like the century-old vines, grew slowly but created deep roots, destined to endure through generations.